Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special weekend edition stream of the Rochford Files. We live in a world where Adam Silver allowed us to have a Hawks and Bucks Eastern Conference Finals. Wow. Not only that, but Phoenix and the LA Clippers as well. As the stream is titled, the most unexpected NBA Finals of our NBA playoffs of our lifetime is taking place right now. Happy late Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And I'm about to put out the Skype stream, the Skype link out in case anyone wants to call in and share their thoughts about what they've seen in these NBA playoffs. So keep an eye out for that. And I just gotta go back to Twitter and then I'll get more into this. And there we go. How about that? Series between the Atlanta Hawks and Philadelphia 76ers. Atlanta winning 3 games on the road against the Philadelphia 76ers. And it all started with that unexpected game 1 where they jumped out to that big 20-point lead for the majority of the game. So I think that really was a tone-setting game for Atlanta. And I think that gave them the belief that they could steal that series once they got that game 1 under the belt. They took a couple punches back from Philadelphia, that was clear. But as the series went on, it became more and more clear that the 76ers just didn't. There's just something off about Philadelphia, man. They went into that series with. I thought they went into that with the mindset that they could win that without trying that hard, to be honest with you. It was clear that they underestimated Atlanta throughout that series. And you gotta go through all the moments which Philadelphia gave Atlanta life again, especially blowing that 26-point lead in Game 5. And coincidentally for Atlanta, Lou Williams and Danilo Gallinari were both on the floor for that 31-point, in that closing lineup for that 31-point comeback against the Warriors in 2019. They were on the floor for that 26-point comeback in Game 5. But there were plenty of problematic trends when you look at things from the Sixers standpoint. First off, Ben Simmons and his refusal to shoot the ball. it really got to the point where he was just another Raul Neto out there, who one of those type of point guards whose niche was only bringing the ball up. And when you're only doing that, it's hard for teams to uh, respect you on defense, even if you do rack up a good amount of assists. Like, even though he still had 13 assists tonight, but you have to be able to do more on the floor for your team than just be a bring the ball up and pass it to the open guy, especially when you're on that 5-year max and you're supposed to be the 2B, the 1B guy to Joel Embiid. And the other point, another bad trend for Philadelphia was all the missed layups that Tobias Harris had tonight. He only shot 8 of 24. He was very up and down in the series. In fact, I believe in Game 5, that was a single-digit scoring output, and for Tobias Harris, he's supposed to be the scorer of that, the true number 2 scorer, and he left so many paint points, blew so many opportunities on those, man. And when you look at all those layups that he missed, and that's even more important than the three-pointer that was very inconsistent for him. It's another reason why Philadelphia couldn't close the series out sooner. And however, one guy who was consistently very good for them was Seth Curry. The only issue is that he just couldn't guard Kevin Huerter tonight. And Huerter had his Game 7. He was the guy who carried Atlanta tonight to victory. 27 points. And he just kept breaking down Curry off the dribble time after time again. He made a lot of tough shots, but he eventually went into the starting lineup after Atlanta took their couple punches back from Philadelphia after that unexpected Game 1 performance from Atlanta. And he's really elevated his play in the postseason, especially as teams are sized up, especially with Philadelphia having Ben Simmons and Matisse Thybulle and Tobias Harris all chip in on guarding Trae Young. That really opened up Kevin to have the advantageous matchup of going against Seth Curry. And that was pretty much the pivotal difference. Then the third and final thing that Philadelphia really, the last thing that prevented them from winning that series against Atlanta was Joel Embiid. I mean, even with the knee injury that he's played through, he had a couple games where he had very awesome first through third quarter, but when it came down to the fourth quarter, especially in Game 4, I think he had a 0 for 12 in Game 4 in the fourth quarter. Just an example, and I think Game 5 was like a 1 of 7 or 1 of 8 in the fourth. And at least 2 to 3 turnovers in each of those fourth quarters, in addition to, I think tonight he was a bit better in the fourth quarter, he still wasn't good enough. Still had a couple more costly turnovers that Atlanta capitalized on, especially at the end where Danilo Gallinari got a runaway dunk to increase the lead to 6 when they were still within 4. And for as much as the discussion was placed on Nikola Jokic looking tired in that 4-game sweep against the Suns, it was the same thing that you could argue for Joel Embiid. I think if there's one thing clear about him is he's never had great stamina. He's definitely a special talented center. But there's a reason why you struggle to get him to play near around 40 minutes in the postseason. And I think if you're Joel, I think improving stamina is one of the key things you try to do in this off season. And if you can, and avoiding injury would help him with that as well. And the last part is, once again, this is going to fall squarely on Doc Rivers. Another moment where he comes up short in the postseason. He only had, last year it was supposed to be a series that he should have won against the Denver Nuggets, but we saw him his team blow the 3-1 lead, which led to him leaving the Clippers. But unfortunately, for the success that Doc Rivers has had in the regular season with many of his teams, there's so many points you could point to where he underachieved, especially the 2016 Clippers. Yes, that team was supposed to go up against the Warriors and first-year coach Steve Kerr, but they blew the 3-1 lead against the Rockets, and that ended up being a quick 5-game series for them. Then they had another year or two where it was a semi-disappointing outcome for them. And and that's just how it's gone with Doc Rivers, even when he was in Boston and had the super team with Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce. That team underachieved. The underachieving actually wasn't quite as bad as you could argue with the Clippers, but they did miss the opportunity to make at least one more finals run. I think Danny Ainge didn't help him with that either, because the depth on the roster continued to weaken over time around the big three, especially as they started to decline, and it got to the point where Rajon Rondo ended up being having to play a bigger role for that team than you ideally like. But the main thing that you're going to hear about from this series is definitely going to be time to move on from Ben Simmons. And Mark Stein just posted a post-game question about Ben Simmons being the point guard in a championship team. And Doc Rivers said, "I don't know the answer to that right now." wow. You know, after when a team unexpectedly loses in a game 7 the way that the 76ers did tonight, they lost a series that they were probably solid favorites to win. You're going to get questions like, and they're more revealing than when you just barely get by and exceed expectations, even if they're not your own expectations per se. And it's now to the point where Ben Simmons is not going to get the return in a trade, even though it's definitely going to be more obvious that you've got no other. It's going to be hard to realistically build a team around Embiid and Simmons, and a lot of that has to do with Embiid doesn't really play well away from the basket. I mean, he can shoot threes and break down guys off the dribble a bit, but he's definitely the guy you want playing more in the dunker spot and in the low post. And Ben Simmons, his two best spots on the floor also are post and dunker spot. And we've seen this play out for a while, and I think that Philadelphia's shooting is also depreciated over time as well, compared to the first team that they made the playoffs with. You had Marco Bellinelli, Robert Covington, JJ Redick, Yerson Ilyasova. That was the type of shooting on the floor that you may have been able to make those two guys work together with. But now you're to the point where you arguably blew a chance to trade Ben Simmons for James Harden. And back in January. And that doesn't look, and that's a really bad decision by the Sixers management on that part. I think it was clear that I think you were already starting to get skeptical of how well Ben Simmons could meet his potential with Joel Embiid last year. And we thought it would be a possibility that they would consider it after last year with very mixed play in the last season that Brett Brown coached that team. They were really terrible on the road last season. And I think that wide range of inconsistency would have been more of the signal. But it's now going to take. It took this instead. Ben Simmons, I believe, 3 single figures scoring turnouts in this series. And the worst part about it is he shot so little from the floor that he got hacked into more free throws than anything. That's going to be the real challenge for Doc Rivers and the Sixers management going forward, because you could have had James Harden with that. And think about what type of player you could get in return for Ben Simmons following that performance. And with Joel Embiid around, you don't have the same type of window with a guy like Embiid being injured. With the way he is injury prone compared to other bigs in this league like other players in this league who have stood healthier, like Nikola Jokic, just an example of someone who's managed to stay mostly injury free. And it's hard to think about what. But as for Ben Simmons, I think the best place for him to go is a place where there's no pressure on him to succeed. I think that place, it's hard to say what place that would be exactly that he does. You can't put him on a roster where there's other guys in the rotation that struggle to shoot as well. That won't work out well for him at all. You need him to be surrounded by shooters. For now, I think Charlotte stands out as a team where there won't be a ton of pressure on him to succeed, but I'm not sure that that's something that the Hornets want to do, but that's a good example of a team where that could happen for him. I don't know what team out west would be good for that. I suppose it's hard to say. I mean, San Antonio could be a good fit for him because even though that team likes to shoot a lot of mid-range shots, I think that Coach Popovich would be able to put him in the right spots on that team. And after that, maybe the Timberwolves or Blazers. Enough about that, though. The Atlanta Hawks, impressive series. And they don't, even with as often as Trae Young put together 30-point scoring performances for them, up until tonight where they really struggled to score, where he had another of those all-time bad shooting performances, like Drew Holiday the previous night. Fortunately for him, he just hit just enough shots where they won. But I want to say that I think the next most critical player to that victory was Clint Capella. He held his own with Joel Embiid. As players got more tired throughout that series, it was Capella who elevated his defensive one-on-one defense against Joel Embiid rather than what you usually see among great offensive players, as they tend to close the deal when things get tough. And that's even though the Hawks had some timely shooting from the role players, I think there's no Clint Capella on that roster. no way they beat the Sixers, despite all the flaws I just pointed out that happened to them throughout the series. Let's go back to last night with Game 7 in that series with Milwaukee and Brooklyn. Very impressive by the Milwaukee Bucks to come away with that series. And that's even with taking into consideration Coach Budenholzer not being the best. Having the best game plan and decision making on the defensive coverages against Brooklyn. It was almost, they nearly let that series slip due to allowing Brooklyn to take Giannis Antetokounmpo out of the game defensively by just being on the most ball dependent on one of their less essential offensive players. But fortunately for Budenholzer in Game 7, that foul trouble to PJ Tucker forced him into having more Chris Middleton on Kevin Durant. And I said that was the X factor in the series was Chris Middleton and Kevin Durant. Well, Chris Middleton individually was that, as he often is for Milwaukee. But the reason that he was the X factor for me was defensively. He's always been a very good individual defender. Last night he was forced into guarding Kevin Durant more, and it worked out very well for him, as other than that game tying long two, it seemed like more the turnovers or bad shots that Kevin Durant took late happened when Chris Middleton was guarding him as opposed to PJ Tucker. And it even became you started to wonder at times whether playing Brook Lopez heavy minutes was good for Milwaukee offensively, where that game got so tight where you started to wonder maybe if you had another guard out on the floor, if that would have opened things up a bit because Brooklyn really packed it in on Giannis, and it was still impressive how much that Antetokounmpo was able to get into the paint in spite of all that. Also, Milwaukee had to win that series. You have two of the three super teamers and Kyrie Irving and James Harden in and out of the lineup. If you couldn't win that series against Brooklyn under those circumstances, I really don't know where you could have gone from there if you're Milwaukee. And they nearly blew that game last night. And off of two horrible inbound passes. The first one being towards the end of the fourth quarter, where they threw it to Brook Lopez in the corner, but Lopez didn't even look to shoot the ball, and it was a shot clock violation. Then the next one was with 1 second left, and they ended up having to throw that, and it was a ran for a while. Giannis ended up catching it in a long two territory when you had more of your catch and shoot guys on the floor. Then we go to overtime. I think that was the point for me, which was worse than anything else. When Brooklyn, or Kevin Durant, I believe, he scored an early basket in overtime. Then Milwaukee went nearly 4 minutes without scoring in that overtime. Then you saw brick after brick after brick by the Nets when they should have been able to build that comfortable 6 to 8 point lead by the time Milwaukee started to find their offense again. But no. Credit to Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday for just hitting enough shots when they counted most. Like Trae Young tonight. And Brook Lopez, in spite of wondering whether he was out on the court for too many minutes throughout that series, he came through with a couple blocks late in that game. And it showed why it pretty much vindicated having a extra shot blocker out on the floor when they could have gone small to gain a bit more offensively, but it turned out to work out okay in spite of Coach Budenholzer allowing his Defensive Player of the Year to be a fringe help player. As for this Eastern Conference Finals, that's about... Oh wait, I'll go into the Nets. Another example of a failed super team. And you're going to wonder how they can fill the holes on their roster, because they do not have very high caliber 3-and-D players right now in Brooklyn. And in fact, they had to play more of their tweener bigs throughout that series in order to compensate for the lack of better 3-and-D options on the roster. And they had to go to a lot of Jeff Green, a lot of Blake Griffin. I think Bruce Brown, he's definitely not a guy you say that I think Bruce Brown is worthy of his spot. He's proved it. He's just not a guy who's gonna create for himself very often, but he's definitely the type of 3-and-D player you want. Joe Harris, he had a very bad shooting series, especially following Game 2. It really went downhill for him. And when you look at the roster, he's the 4th highest paid player. And that's the only way you're going to probably ever get that. That high level 3-and-D piece potentially, especially if that team, if you ever consider making a trade, wants a guy with Joe Harris's shooting on their roster. So that's something to keep in mind, because even though the buyout market it has gotten better than what it had been in the past. But you're not going to see, I think you're eventually going to see some down years of the caliber of player that you could bring in off the buy-in market. And I think when you try to rely on that to fill in the margins of your roster, then you're going to have a harder time sustaining the supporting casts of three guys with that talent level. And all three guys have the potential to have long-term injuries on any given notice. And you've got to be a bit nervous because Kevin Durant has just agreed to join Team USA for the Olympics coming up soon. And and when you look at a guy like Dominique Wilkins, the only other guy who's really played at a high level following the Achilles injury, while Kevin Durant did maintain his play, you have to remember that I think he only played about 40 games or so this season. So that's going to be another thing that's going to limit the ceiling of the roster is even if Kevin Durant can maintain his play over these next 2 years in Brooklyn, if he's not on the floor, then there's no guarantee that you're going to put it all together for them. As I'll get into that Hawks and Bucks conference finals preview later on this show, it's time to shift to some recap real quick over the second round because I don't talk sports every night. Well, not every week either because the Rochford Files is normally provides political analysis, and I usually only do the straight sports talk on the weekend. So let's go back to recapping that Jazz and Clippers series real quick, as that really as the upsets that have just happened, making it the least predictable NBA postseason that we've had in our lifetime. My finals matchup got taken out with the Bucks and Clippers taking care of the Jazz and the Nets. And it's time for me to talk about what went wrong for the Jazz. And if you watched a couple weeks ago when we previewed the semifinals matchup with the Jazz and Clippers, with the Clippers playing their small ball, they don't have an official name for it yet. But since you got Patrick Beverley on the roster, I think it's fair to call your small ball depth lineup Beverly Hills ball. They started to go to that against the Dallas Mavericks, even in spite of former coach Rick Carlisle employing Boban Marjanovic on them. And in that preview, I had suggested that could be a problem for Utah in that series again. And one thing that I felt like was a concern for them. But what I thought Utah had going for them this time around, that they would be able to figure out a way to neutralize the smaller lineups of the Clippers. And it wasn't necessarily going to be by Gobert being an offensive threat per se, but just maybe just finding a way defensively to not get killed by that matchup. And here's the problem with Utah. They're a team of, outside of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, they have a pretty solid group of guys who can be decent complementary scorers, but they are not guys that can defend and hold their own when you spread them out and isolate them on the perimeter. Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley, that's a really small backcourt. And there's going to come a point where you have to consider getting away from giving Donovan Mitchell a bigger two guard to properly complement him on the floor. Because we've seen time and time again, whether it's the Mitchell-Rubio backcourt or the Mitchell-Conley backcourt, even though Conley missed the first 5 games in that series, they just don't have the individual defensive competency on the perimeter. That's something that you can cover up with Rudy Gobert in the regular season, since teams tend to not break out this type of sophisticated strategy in regular season matchups, and that's how Rudy Gobert has been a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, is due to the fact that that team, by and large, there aren't that many teams who can truly expose Rudy Gobert in the way a team that plays small can. Or if you got a big that can score at all levels on the floor, like Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns. Those are the type of bigs, if you do have a center, that's the other way of exposing Gobert, because he likes to play in the paint. Even though the synergy numbers, the advanced stats when you put him out in pick and roll, they actually looked very good for him, like they did for Nikola Jokic. 2 guys that you think, oh, you can pick them apart in pick and roll, but they managed to do very well on being targeted in the regular season in that pick and roll situation. And part of that's due to the strategy not being fully ramped up, teams maybe not dialed in or make that extra pass as often as you would in a 7-game series. And that's where, in Game 6, really exposed it for Utah. Terrence Mann, 39 points. And so many of those shots came from when Rudy Gobert was supposed to be guarding Mann. And here's the problem you have with a traditional rim protecting big whenever you go 5 out on those rim protectors. Anytime they see one of their teammates get beat off the dribble, their tendency is to go help at the rim. But that is what kills you when you have a team that can kick out to 3-point shooters like Terrence Mann and Reggie Jackson. And that's how you lose a series. And that's a problem for Utah. And it also comes down to a coaching issue for Quinn Snyder. Even though, numbers didn't reflect kindly to Derek Favors in that series, you've got to be capable of pulling him off the floor and cutting his minutes if that's what the series calls for. And if there's one thing that became clearer for the Utah Jazz over the course of that 7-game series, it's that you had to start cutting Rudy Gobert's minutes. And I don't necessarily think that Rudy Gobert was Derek Favors was the only guy who could play extra in place of Rudy Gobert. And it also hits back to where they brought in Ersan Ilyasova back in February. Now, didn't you bring him in for series just like that, where you have no alternative but to play 5-out ball, but at the same time you don't want Bojan Bogdanovic to play center? Isn't that what you brought him in for? And it's also an issue that when you bring a guy in like that, but you don't have a real plan for him in case of emergency. And it kind of is like, were a couple other moves like that as well, especially with the Nuggets and JaVale McGee. It felt clear to me that Malone really only had a purpose for playing him if the Nuggets ran into the Lakers, and I felt like, I'm not even sure what moment for Ilyasova that was, but if you had gotten him to be if you had been able to give him some minutes here and there and get him ready for a playoff run, I think you'd have been in position to get something more out of him when you needed give him a bigger workload. Even though it's not a game changer per se, but the fact that he's there and you didn't try it, it's going to be an issue that you can argue with Quinn Snyder's coaching strategy, is the fact that he's too afraid to really pull Rudy Gobert when the matchup isn't right for him. Even though a lot of that has to do with him being paid as a supermax player. But that's just something that you have to adjust to. And with Mark, I looked to a few years back where Marc Gasol won Defensive Player of the Year, and we knew what his limitations were. He wasn't a great jumper. He never had great lateral quickness in spite of him winning that award, being a very strong team defender, managing to, I believe he averaged a career high in blocks that year with about 1.5 blocks and roughly the same amount of steals, in addition to being part of having one of the lowest defensive ratings in the league and being part of the top defensive lineups in basketball as well. And that, and I think that's on coaching to be able to make those adjustments. But before I continue on with second round recap, I gotta go to this tweet from Torre real quick. Is this not a nightmare for the NBA? None of the big crossover stars are left in the playoffs, guys who casual basketball fans know and want to watch. No LeBron, Steph, Durant, Luka, only one of the top 15 best-selling jerseys are still playing. This is not good for the league. Of course, you've got the common criticisms that the big market NBA, this is big market NBA propaganda right here from Torre, a mainstream media political host who tried to mock the Fred Hampton leftists a while back when they were first launching. Look here. Will it probably hurt the NBA a bit short term? Technically, yes. But this is also a wake-up call for the NBA to market players outside of LA, outside of Miami, New York, Dallas, Chicago, Golden State. If you market players in the smaller markets, then you're going to stabilize yourself for when you have a postseason where your Final Four teams are the LA Clippers, Phoenix Suns, Atlanta Hawks, Milwaukee Bucks. This is mainly him manufacturing consent to the idea of the NBA being in trouble from this outcome. And when you don't market the league to, if you don't properly market your league, you're going to have this type of mindset that you'll see from all the big media talking heads. And that's just gotta. But you also have to realize that the reason why the NBA doesn't do better year in, year out, and why they have a stunted ceiling, so to speak, is how often a big market or top superstar continuously makes it year in and year out to the NBA Finals, and how often you can pick two teams before the NBA season starts, and how often those two teams end up meeting in the finals. And there's another tweet about him elaborating further. You can't now market the Suns or Hawks and get casual fans excited about watching guys never heard of. The story of LeBron or Steph or Durant is known to non-super fans long before June. real fans will watch, but you get big ratings when casual fans watch. Here, you're kind of. This is another. This is more that circular argument that you get, and you're going to continue to see it. And if these finals end up having lower ratings, in fact, even lower than last year's, for example, between the Heat and Lakers, these circular arguments, they're only going to continue from guys like Torre. Here's the difference, though. I think the style of play in today's NBA, at least 25 teams play a style of basketball that is more as, which is pretty much aesthetically pleasing to the average fan. And unlike the late 90s, early 2000s, where you had really sluggish basketball, and even the regular season wasn't much better in terms of high pace and scoring, and the slugfest only intensify in the postseason. I think it's different now, and it's easier to plug two teams, and if they play good games, you're going to see more people turn out for it. And it is, and once again, it's the fault of the NBA for not properly marketing their stars correctly. But I point to the other time where you had a NBA Finals where you had two teams which casual fans just weren't excited about. And that would be 2005 when the Spurs and Pistons went 7 games. But there's also another problem with that series as well, and that was the fact that Spurs and Pistons were two really slow, grinded out slugfest teams, and that just made for some really rough basketball to watch. Even though there's people who are going to tell you that they love these defensive battles, I'll be honest, they're not. It's not great basketball to watch for me personally. I can appreciate some well-played defense, but at the same time, it's not. They aren't going to be games I'm going to look at and say, if I ever see that game being replayed on NBA TV, I really want to watch that 2005 NBA Finals again. No. And I think that you've got a chance to still have a really interesting finals where Devin Booker and Trae Young could really go at it and put together some really interesting games. And if word gets out that about a game where people missed it, I think more of them will continue to tune in if there's some special game, if it's like a Hawks and Suns NBA Finals. I think there's a chance to get a new audience in that may have not viewed in the past due to LeBron and Laker fatigue. And there's a lot more of those people out there than you think. They complain about the NBA and how they'll never let their market have a chance to go all the way. Then you look at this season, you finally got the opportunity. But those fans may be so disengaged from the NBA that they may not even be paying that much attention to it because the power of the big market, the T is so strong. And that's once again a counter to this whole circular argument being made by this guy, Torre. And this more circular argument, the games will be good is besides the point. Small markets is missing the point. The league and the players need big ratings to continue maximizing their income, and this NBA Finals will not deliver the casual fans make ratings huge. That is still an assumption, and I bet, and I'm still willing to roll the dice on if you have low turnout for a great game, that you're going to have a surprise gain in viewers that you wouldn't expect. So let's not set that bad ratings thing in stone. And this, once again, goes back to the circular argument of which now includes concern trolling over the collective bargaining agreement, which, according to Torre, requires big market teams in order to support the rest of the league. I see a lot of people who love and understand the game of basketball, but do not understand the show business aspect of the NBA. It's cool. That same show and business aspect is why the NBA is hurting in their current limited ceiling that you have from the lack of growth. You see, these arguments may make sense to some people on its basic value, but for people like me, if you're a leftist like me, you're always going to challenge these popular narratives to begin with. And it's just further proof that the NBA needed to be forced into having an outcome like this happen. And the fact that you had two teams who you wouldn't have thought would win a Game 7 on the road, pull it out last night and tonight. That's still really shocking. And crazy that we had this. Well, yeah, I seen that come up on the timeline when I was doing the show. And I felt like I had to get into that. And try to challenge that argument. And I think I left off. Yeah, I was finishing up that recap of the Jazz and Clippers series before I broke away from that. Last thing I wanted to say is Clippers, actually, the Kawhi Leonard injury actually helps them be a more likable team, as odd as that sounds. And you get to the point, I think one of the issues the Clippers have with that full healthy roster is I think they really spread the ball around too much, and that's why part of why they lost to the Nuggets last year is there'd be games where Paul George and Kawhi Leonard wouldn't take over, and they would just try to play within the flow for far too long. And it was still kind of a problem in this postseason as well, even though they managed to win all 4 games on the road against Dallas. And it's a long way to go for them still. But I feel like the injury change allowed guys like Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, Marcus Morris, and Nicholas Batum to a degree grow into a bigger role, which at times they can step up a bit better in that situation where when a guy's out as opposed to when everyone's healthy, and it really just feels like they're trying to spread the wealth around too much. And part of that issue is due to not having a true floor general on the roster. And with Rajon Rondo no longer being capable of doing that on a nightly basis, I think that's why the Clippers have so much skepticism. But fortunately, I think the good thing about Kawhi Leonard being out for them, even though they still may not be good enough to beat the Suns as they are right now, is the fact that, as I said, it's easier for them to allow their guys to find a groove offensively. Even though today was kind of a weird game, which I'll get into more shortly after I do a quick breakdown of the Suns and Nuggets series. You know me, I'm a Nuggets fan, and in ways there were certain aspects of that series which were pretty frustrating to watch as a Nuggets fan, even though I knew the talent gap was too big for Denver to overcome. And Phoenix just did a great job of spreading out Denver and exploiting the way that they play. They managed to do a pretty good job of making it hard for the others to score off of the presence of Nikola Jokic. Jokic wasn't as efficient. I think he ended up making his decision making was more questionable throughout the course of that series compared to Portland. And he just it took him till late in game, about half time of game 3, to really adjust to that defensive strategy. Because I've always said with Nikola Jokic, he says he likes to play patient. But when you run into a top level defensive team, they use that patience against him very well. And I think he just started to realize that he needed to stop being impatient and just take the ball and go. And I think he was starting to find a bit more success by doing that. And it allowed his teammate, it made it easier for his teammates to play off of that as well. But unfortunately, it was too late, and he didn't have enough guard. He didn't have enough competent guard depth since Will Barton wasn't himself too late in that series. Monte Morris, he was really bad in games 1 and 2. They in a way wasted a really big Facu Campazzo Game 4 performance since he hit 4 threes in that game. They got nothing from Austin Rivers in that series after Austin had some big moments in that Portland series. But defensively was more of where I was concerned with the way Coach Malone had a strategy for that series. The big issue was getting away from the preferred Nikola Jokic pick and roll defense was it, playing 2 at the level of the ball. But the problem with that was Malone's response to it. They gave up a ton of corner threes due to Phoenix doing very well, making extra passes. And also, in addition to that, Denver did not have their rotations down most of the time for that rotation to the corner 3. Then it led to Malone just having Jokic drop pretty much from game 2 on. Then for some reason, he had his guards try to continuously fight over the screens with Chris Paul, one of the best mid-range shooters, who, yes, I would advocate into forcing to be more of a scorer, but you've got to be able to force him to shoot longer twos than they did in that series, and that was the worst part about it for me, was the fact that they did not bring the right strategy to that series. But it also, ignoring the inability of Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon to elevate into the roles that they currently had with injuries to that roster. The other issue is Malone just isn't creative enough defensively, to me. I think a couple of small things you have to do is get even more creative with defense in the course of a 7-game series. And I think Steve Kerr really shows it with for example, Steve Kerr did it, I think, in a series against the Memphis Grizzlies where after being down 2-1, he switched Andrew Bogut onto Tony Allen. And he also gets really creative with making sure Steph Curry avoids being involved in pick and roll coverage. And they do that by making sure Steph switches before the picks happen. And I think that's something that Malone is going to have to consider doing with Jokic, because I think he wanted to try to save Jokic's energy more for the offensive end, but at the same time, he's having him play drop is also a woefully bad idea. I think one idea I have is you have to figure out a way to get Jokic onto a floor spacer, like whoever the stand in the corner guy is. You need to figure out a way to make that happen before big who likes to set screens a lot for a point guard makes it happen. And my idea would have been you get Jokic off, you switch Jokic with Gordon on Aiden, for example, before that action happens. Then you can have Gordon be the second guy at the ball. Then Jokic can be the main guy who rotates over to the rolling big. Then I think you may be able to fix the rotation issue a bit by having your faster players be able to run around the perimeter, as opposed to Jokic having to make that second or third rotation at times. So that's just an example of something I'd like to see a bit more defensive sophistication going forward, because Coach Malone was very laissez-faire approach to defensive strategy. And I just don't think, even though I know that he's not going to get fired, or that outcome was not going to place him out on the hot seat whatsoever, I think his strategy is he's too reactive. He's not proactive enough in a situation like that. And you could argue that he wasn't proactive enough last year against the Lakers either. That's one thing that needs to improve from Coach Malone. And my issue is, I do have issues with coaches who wait to put all their chips on the table until they're down 3-0. I think you gotta start pushing chips forward after you lose 2 in a row, especially in a 2-0 situation. And that's one area that I think Michael Malone really needs to improve before in the future, because that could still be that reactive mentality could still sink Denver with a fully healthy roster next season by the time next year's playoffs come around, and I don't want to see that happen. And back to the Suns. Once again, what they do really well is they play a really balanced floor game. They score from all levels collectively, and that's why they beat the Lakers, is because of that balanced floor plan. And there's a lot of teams that really lean into one area of the floor, whether it's threes or the paint, but they do it better because they don't fall in love with one thing on a night-to-night basis. And Devin Booker is really showing out to be the player that we thought we could, with the potential he flashed. And once again, I'm disappointed that the Nuggets did not draft him in 2015. They had the chance with that 7th pick that they used instead of Emmanuel Mudiay. I was about to call him Manu. Although I did know that Denver wanted to try to get a second pick to get him as well. But it was clear now that they should have done it. They should have just made sure to use that seventh on Devin. And he's really having a breakout postseason. And they are having a timely, all the right contributions from everyone else. When it comes to the series against the Clippers, I think DeAndre Ayton's going to have to show up big. He was well on his way to that in that Game 1 victory against the Clippers today. Big 40-point triple-double for Devin. You had the others with their solid contributions like Campaign, Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges. Usually a huge defender, and from the looks of it, they really took Terrence Mann out of the game. What was most surprising to me is he only got 4 shots today. That was what really stood out to me, and even though I don't think this means that Phoenix is on their way to another lopsided series, since I believe that the Clippers are going to figure it out. They're going to be able to put up more of a fight than you think, and I'm still still question whether they can do it, since as of right now, 2-0-2 is where the Clippers won you. And they may not win game 2 either. What stood out to me, though, was I think they've got to figure out what big to play. That's going to be the issue for the Clippers, because today was another day where Marcus Morris didn't have it, and they only played him 21 minutes. Then you also, they tried to rob DeMarcus Cousins. Then he scored 11 points in like 5 minutes, and everything went downhill from him after that. He had that phone book vertical dunk on Dario Saric, and he still managed to finish negative 11 in his just 13 minutes. And a lot of that turnaround happened after like those first 5 minutes where he put up those 11 points. I don't think they're going to be able to play him that. I think you tried it, you gave it a shot, but the fact is it's just not going to work. And you just may have to elevate Ivica Zubac into a upper 20-minute type of play. I mean, he played 18 today, but you're probably going to need more from him. I think the other issue that the Clippers are going to have is trying to play Beverly and Rondo together. So that's another problem for them. And I think their bench may just be too flawed for this series. And even though you want to be hopeful for them being able to put up a fight, but that just may be the reality for the Clippers in this series. I still think the Clippers can make this a 6-game series, but when it comes down to it, I look at that bench and I just see a bunch of flaws in that unit. Rondo can no longer get it done on a nightly basis. Short-armed Luke Kennard usually is a guy that teams like to target off the bench. We know Cousins, and he's pretty much shot as his ability to defend much of anything. So after seeing that game today, I just don't. I think this is finally the moment where the Clippers will miss Serge Ibaka. He was the one guy who, even though he can be kind of a flawed player as well, and he's not as he can be an overrated defender, mainly due to his ability to block shots. But he was definitely the player for this series, and I think that's gonna hurt them. While Suns in 5 is definitely a possibility to puzzle man, I personally think that Clippers will figure out a way to push to 6. They'll probably win the 2 home games, and the Suns will close it out in the games 5 and 6. I wanted to be more hopeful for Clippers, as I was saying, but I think Phoenix is just too sound defensively to let meltdowns happen in the same way that they could against the Utah Jazz. Let's go over that preview the Eastern Conference Finals series that we've got between the Milwaukee Bucks and Atlanta Hawks. Initial thoughts are, I think this series is supposed to be the one for the Bucks now. But like the Sixers, they could just easily underestimate the Hawks' ability to compete in that series. And that's why I will not sell Atlanta short in their ability to make things tough. I think Trae Young will still figure out a way to have success with Drew Holiday as a primary defender. But the issue if there's an issue on Atlanta's side of things, I think it's probably going to come down to having the depth to guard Giannis Antetokounmpo. I do think that with John Collins, Danilo Gallinari, you're going to run into some foul problem over the course of that series. And then you're going to have to let guys like Gallinari, Solomon Hill, possibly Tony Snell guard it. And that's going to be a point of skepticism on my part. And I think that's where Atlanta could lose the series with their wing depth. As for Milwaukee, it comes back to their guard depth. If Atlanta finds a way to win that series, it will be on the strength of their guards, like Trae Young, Lou Williams, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kevin Huerter. I think that's the area where if Atlanta manages to pull off an upset again, it will be because of their guard play. Then the other concern I have is, will Clint Capella be able to stay on the floor? And I say that because I feel like Atlanta with Milwaukee, they may be able to figure out a way defensively, even though that may be giving too much credit to Mike Budenholzer. They may be able to figure out a way to not have to really give a lot of defensive attention to Clint Capella outside of like Giannis helping and whatnot. That's going to be the interesting matchup, I think. Also for Milwaukee, you'll probably be able to bring Bobby Portis back into the mix, even though that was another thing that people questioned in that Brooklyn series is did Portis get removed from the rotation too soon? Or did they not give him another shot again when they could have? Now, I do think Bobby's back in the rotation for this series. And I think he'll be able to have staying power as well, going up against Okongwu. Oh, here's a question for Atlanta. I think they're going to have to play with more Collins at the 5 in this series. And you may be forced into playing a bit of Gallinari or Solomon Hill at the 5 as well. Especially if Giannis has the success against Milwaukee that I think he will. Against Atlanta that I think he will. And I bet and right now, I believe that Milwaukee's going to be going to their first NBA Finals in 40 plus years. In nearly 50 years. 6 games on that one as well. I think, as I said, Giannis Antetokounmpo will be too much for that Hawks front line. I don't think the guards can outplay the group from Milwaukee as much as you think. And I think they're going to hold their own with Trae Young. They've got enough. Even if Drew can't guard him the whole time, I think Chris Middleton can shift in. But the challenge for Budenholzer will be there really isn't a guy for PJ Tucker to guard this time around. So I think that's another thing that you're going to look out. He may just be the backup 5 option as well. And even though you're without Dante DiVincenzo, who is such a key complementary piece more than people realize, and it may have been less hard for them to beat Brooklyn without that with a key complementary player like him. But I believe it's going to be a Suns and Bucks finals. And that's going to be my call for that series. And once these conference finals are finished, I'll be back on for another special where I talk about the conference finals recap, then go into a finals preview. And I expect it to be Suns and Bucks for that one. And I think that's going to be a very interesting matchup again in that one. But I wanted to end the show with this. I'm going to, with Tuesday being the NBA draft lottery, I would like to try to do a bit of prediction before we get into Tuesday. I may mess around with this a few times, But we'll go down to the list and see which teams are most deserving of a number one draft pick. And for me, I feel like Detroit stands out most. I think they're the team in this top seven-ish that is most deserving of the number one draft pick. Even though Houston is kind of in rebuilding, I do feel like they are not exactly the most deserving team due to their recent history. Then you got Orlando, another team in the purgatory, who's had numerous opportunities at the number one pick, like a team a few spots down, like the Minnesota Timberwolves, who haven't been able to launch their team beyond being a lottery team. And I feel like arguably the second most deserving team of that number one draft pick is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I also feel like, given the luck of being a fan of the Nuggets and then being in the Northwest Division, I feel like that's probably going to be the way it plays out, is with OKC winning the number one pick. Cleveland, I think the LeBron being around is worn off on them, but you also feel like they've won the lottery so often that you kind of want to see something fresh as well. Golden State is likely in it. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Golden State move up in the draft lottery again. Personally, that's another thing that I feel can happen as well. And Toronto, even though they just won a finals a couple of years ago, I think when you've got a team that's ran the right way under Masai Ujiri, you're always going to have some goodwill, even though you've barely had a drop off from being a highly successful franchise. Orlando has 2 picks. That's going to be very interesting for them, and that may be the thing that they need to really pull themselves out of the treadmill, so to speak. Then Sacramento, I feel like they're another franchise who, even if they're move up, they don't hit on the right pick, so they're probably not going to get any better. New Orleans, that team is kind of in a treadmill situation as well, even as Zion Williamson grows and Brandon Ingram continues to hold up. They just don't have the right complementary pieces in place with that team. When you look at that situation, they could be losing both Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart. And both guys may not even want to be there anymore. And the reports of Zion's family members not wanting to see him in a different situation. The Charlotte Hornets, I think they could still really benefit from having another big jump in the lottery, although those type of things don't happen for you back-to-back years. Indiana, yes, they could really use that luck because even though they have a team that has some pretty good depth, they've had some pretty bad luck with injuries. And they need to they could really use a break. And at the end of the lottery, thanks to Golden State not being good enough to be a top 10 team in the NBA, they get to keep their pick from the Kelly Oubre trade. Let's see what I get. You know, this doesn't feel bad to me, to be honest with you. This feels pretty. I think this feels pretty good. Houston dropping feels right. Orlando dropping also feels right. Minnesota dropping feels right as well. You know, I think, even though I don't think Cleveland moving up would be the right call, the only thing I would really change from this prediction is I'm gonna switch Cleveland to 4 and move Toronto and OKC up one more spot. And that'll be my prediction for this year's NBA lottery. Oh, thank you to all of you who came in and watched this special NBA playoff breakdown show of the Rochford Files with your host, Andrew Rochford. And I'll be back on tomorrow afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern, your normal political talk at 3 p.m. Eastern, right here, twitch.tv/The Rochford Files. And I'm just taking a quick look to see where I could send my viewers, if there's anywhere. I don't see any good channels, but don't forget to follow, subscribe to the Rochford Files on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at NugLifeConrad, NUGGLIFE Conrad. And also follow the Rochford Files page on Twitter at A Rochford Files. And in the coming days, I plan to create an Instagram for the page, and for that to be the number 3 promotion source right now for the Rochford Files. And with that being said, I'll see everyone tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, your normal political talk on the Rochford Files. And this is Andrew Rochford saying goodbye and good night.